Welcome to Paranormal or Reality. On today's video, we explore some ghost stories. First, we take a look at shadow people. Then we investigate a haunting toy truck. Now make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this. Let's begin. I used to live in a rough neighborhood with my family. It was filled with junkies and wasn't overall very safe. I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life basically, until recently when I moved. I had a few stalkers. I've had to call the cops on my neighbors, but that's not the point of this story. That's just for perspective. My parents never really got along well with the owners of the house. They were elderly, so they didn't want to fix any of the problems that was wrong with the property. My mother fought with them for years to install an air conditioner that we only got to use for about a year or less. My room was at the front of the house, yet it was at the end of the house. The layout is confusing, but to try and put it in perspective, my windows were easy access to the front yard if I wanted to sneak out instead of having to walk all the way to the front door. I lived in this house for about 5 years during COVID and the lockdown. That whole period. I've always believed in the paranormal and supernatural. It was a way to make life more interesting. I'd watch ghost stories along with horror movies religiously as a child. I probably shouldn't have. I grew to have a habit of staying up really late or all night during lockdown. There are times I've accidentally scared myself because of the ghost stories. I've had a few encounters with the unexplained throughout my life. I would call myself a medium of sorts. At the start, I saw shadow people, and hearing my name when no one was around or in a crowd of people, sensing a presence when no one was around. Stuff like that. It wasn't until I was getting into witchcraft when things started to get interesting, let's say. One particular night I was staying up late as usual. I needed to go to the bathroom. Since it was dark, I used my phone flashlight as a way to get there and back to my room regardless of me memorized the layout of my house. I'm not one to get scared or try to run back to my room once the lights were off, just to be clear. I used the bathroom. Everything felt all right. Nothing happening as usual when I exited the toilet. I usually expect to see something jump out at me, so I braced myself for nothing. While I was washing my hands, something felt off, as if I was being watched. I look up at the window to see nothing, only the textured glass so that no one could see into the bathroom. I dry my hands, grab my phone again, and walk closer to the bathroom door. The closer I got, the more tense I felt, as if I was being warned to not get closer. I ignored it because I wanted to go back to my bed. After I left the bathroom, the only light being from my phone's flashlight, I felt something right behind me. I didn't turn around to look at it, only because I didn't want to see something I shouldn't have. I've read stories and myths where people are told not to look at entities because they could take you or something like that. I didn't turn around because of fear, but I was frozen for a bit. I couldn't move while I felt this presence getting closer. My fight or flight instincts kicked in when I felt something grab my shoulder. I would say I sprinted, but I didn't. It was 2 a.m., and my entire family was asleep. I didn't want to risk waking them up, so I fast walked as quietly as I could. I felt it follow me, and it only disappear once I entered my room. Those crystals my mother brought me, which protect me, must have worked at that time. I jumped into my bed and hid under the covers, as any adolescent would do. I ended up falling asleep not long after, terrified to what was there that night. To this day, I still don't know what it was. Okay, saying something is communicating is slightly misleading. There is a strong possibility that it is my dad. There are only 2 occasions this has happened. I am a 29-year-old male. My dad passed away 4 years ago quite suddenly from a heart attack. He had pre-existing heart issues and diabetes, but he had it under control and was getting better. It made no difference, he still passed away. At the time, my son was about 18 months, but due to COVID, we missed out on some quality time with Dad. Luckily, he got to spend the first year of his life with him. Fast forward a couple months later, I'm in relaxing with my son and wife in the living room, too tired to tidy up the destruction from the day of playing. Suddenly, one of my son's toys go off. It was a baby shark-shaped fitting toy that you removed and put back together. We had lost all the pieces throughout the day, so there is no way for this toy to set off without putting your finger over the tiny sensor, then remove it. At first it was baby shark a few times. Then it would switch to Grandpa Shark over and over again. It would stop. I would jokingly say, "Dad, if that's you, press Grandpa Shark." Then Grandpa Shark would go off once. We were both stunned. Without warning, the toy started going off again, alternating between Baby Shark and Grandpa Shark over and over again, eventually getting so fast that you could barely make out what the toy was saying. I panicked and said, "Dad, this isn't funny anymore. If this is you, stop it." The moment my sentence finished, the toy stopped. My wife ran over there and switched it off. Now let's fast forward again to yesterday. My son is now 5, and I now have an 11-month-old daughter. My daughter was in her high chair. My son was still awake, complaining about dinner as he wanted sweets. We were telling him he hadn't eaten enough food, but he eventually conceded and ate most of it. But as I picked up his plate, he jumps into the air, sending the leftovers flying. I said, "No sweets now. You did something good," then immediately did something bad. I stormed off. My son was upset, so my wife was telling him why he can't have sweets now. I clean up the mess. My son cools off in his bedroom while my wife sorts out the baby for a bath. That's when the baby's walker goes off. It's mainly songs and farm animal noises. It hadn't been touched all day. It was very much nowhere near anything to go off on its own. You physically have to press a button to make it go off. Since that first incident, we always assumed Dad was watching us. So as soon as it stopped, my wife said, "Very funny, Martin. You back again?" The toy went off a few seconds after. We stared at each other in shock and just laughed. We left it a bit longer, just in case it was stuck on a loop, and nothing happened. I said, "Dad, if it's you, press one of the buttons." Again, the toy went off a few seconds after I finished my sentence. So my wife followed on by saying, "I think he's angry we didn't give his grandson some sweets." The toy went off again, so I said, "Do you want used to give him sweets, Dad?" The toy went off again. We laughed, calling my son back down to give him the sweets. I stood alone in the room, one final time asked, "Dad, is that you?" But this time, no answer. The toy remained silent. I wonder what would have happened if we didn't give him any sweets. I've been living in this old house for almost a month now, and strange things have been happening. At first, it was just small things. Doors creaking open on their own, cold drafts in rooms with no windows. But lately, it's been getting worse. Last night, I woke up suddenly, feeling like someone was watching me. I looked around, but my room was empty. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping sound, like fingernails lightly drumming against wood. It was coming from the far corner of the room, near the old wardrobe that was here when I moved in. As I got closer, the tapping stopped, but the air around the wardrobe felt heavy, almost suffocating. I reached out to open the door, but before I could touch it, I noticed something strange. A small, delicate handprint on the dusty surface, too small to belong to any adult. It hadn't been there before. I freaked out, backed away, and left the room, deciding to sleep on the couch downstairs. The moment I laid down, I heard soft, muffled weeping. It was coming from the hallway. I grabbed my phone for some light and cautiously stepped out, following the sound. It led me to the front door, which was slightly ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. Outside, the night was eerily quiet, except for that soft crying. I looked around but saw no one. Then, just as I was about to head back inside, I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the garden, facing the house. She was wearing a long white robe, her dark hair hanging limply over her shoulders. Her head was slightly bowed, and her shoulders shook as she wept. I called out, asking if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Instead, she slowly lifted her head and turned to look at me. Her face was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were empty, hollow, filled with a deep, sorrowful void. I felt a chill run down my spine as she raised one hand, pointing toward the house, then at the small shrine I hadn't really paid much attention to before, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the garden. I couldn't move, frozen in place by fear and curiosity. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but all that came out was a faint, choked sob. Then, Just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone, leaving only the cold night air and the faint smell of incense behind. This morning, I went out to the shrine. It looked old and neglected, with a thin layer of dust covering the stone surface. As I cleaned it, I noticed a faint engraving of a name I couldn't quite make out, worn down by time. Next to it, there was an offering bowl, dry and cracked, with remnants of what looked like long decayed flowers. I have a feeling this spirit is trying to tell me something, but I'm not sure what. My wife's dad had a recognizable white Jeep Wrangler. We sold it a couple months after he had passed away. I was mowing over at the property that my wife inherited from her dad. I got the grass around the house and driveway already done. I was starting to mow down the trails her dad had made through the woods. About a minute or so after I mowed the first turn off, that went up a pretty big hill. Something felt off, like I was being followed. Figuring it was a deer, I turned around and saw the back end of a white Jeep Wrangler going up the hill. It caught me off guard. I backed up so I could see up the hill. There was nothing driving up that hill. It was a long enough hill where I would have had plenty of time to catch the vehicle going up it. I turned off the mower and listened. Still nothing. I was a little rattled, but I had to get those trails mowed. I continued on, and about halfway through, I had that same feeling of being followed. I quickly turned around and again saw the back end of the same white Wrangler going down another longer trail. I hopped off the mower and ran to the top of the trail. There was no Jeep in sight. This part of the trail was about a half-mile long, and there was nowhere to turn off it. I decided that was enough mowing for the day and went back to the house and left. I like to think her dad was coming back to pick up his Jeep and check the trails one more time. Thanks for tuning in. Watch another video if you dare.